do we have any Auction Brief listeners? You don't have to raise your hand just because I'm asking. Oh, that's not great for the T-shirt giveaway. We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, right. The great John Bosch listens. I want to introduce these guys because when I thought about what panelists to get, I know that I've drafted against all of these guys, and they are very good at what they do. And there's not a lot of guys out there who are as experienced as these three. So I wanted to have them here, and I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves in just a second. In case you don't know, my name is Drew Davenport. This is my show. You can find it anywhere you find podcasts. You can find me on Twitter, Drew Davenport FF. I write for Football Guys and 4for4, so you can find my stuff there as well. Thank you so much for coming, because I try every year to continue to push the format, because it is still a bit of a niche, but I believe in it, and I think it's the best way to draft. If you feel like you have an edge over the rest of your league in fantasy football, this is the way to draft. This is the way to push your edge, because there's only so much edge that you can have in a regular snake draft. So if you think you're good, start an auction. That's the way to do it. And I always say this. When you're in a snake draft and it's about to be your turn to pick, you know that feeling, you get a little excited. Who am I going to pick? And then, you got that 20 minutes where you got to wait for your pick again. You feel like that excitement of making that pick the entire time you're in an auction. And that's the way I try to sell it, because it's absolutely true. It is so much fun. It's engaging. There's more strategy. And we're going to talk about all that here in the next hour. So let me introduce these guys, and I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about themselves. We've got Doug Orth here from FF Today. We've got Nate Marcum from Fantasy and Frames. And we got John Bosch from Fantasy Cares. All right. So I'm going to let them tell you where to find them, and then we'll get started. John Lobb, walk 10 feet to your left.
Come home, John Lobb.
I know it's John. He's got a very unique voice, and that's it. That voice you heard was John Lobb. You won't forget it, because that's
As the auction man said himself, I'm Doug Orth with FF Today. Been with FF Today for 17, going on 18 years. You can reach me at DOUGORTH on Twitter and Facebook, and DOUGORTH NFL on Instagram. We'll just do the introductions now.
My name is Nate Marcum. My voice is terrible, so I apologize. Nothing better than having to speak for a couple hours and not taking care of it. But I am also on Twitter at Nate Marcum, NateMarcum. See that? Spelling. Really good. Really good. And Fantasy and Frames. More importantly, follow them at Fantasy and Frames. Great content. I've been playing, 30 years of auctions?
So I'm John Bosch. You can follow me on Twitter at John Bosch FF. I wasn't cool enough to get my own one. So, but yes, Fantasy Cares, that's what I am here to represent most. But more than that, in the reality of what I play, it's auctions. That is what I love. 1999, I think, was when I started the league. That was the first one that I did. It had an auction thing. I love auctions so much. Literally last night we played a game that I've never played before that is a bidding auction card game. It was awesome. What was it? Do you remember what it was called? All right. High Society. Yes, some card game. That's how much I like the auction. That's how I spent my night.
Nate, how long have you been doing auctions?
I can't say 1989 because
1999.
okay, I'll say that would have been 10, but I might have been doing that then. And I think 2000 was the first year that I started with a league that had been, that was baseball initially, and a league that had been going for about 40 years before the internet, so it was pretty in-depth. And now it's a full-gone. I told Drew I'm in one league where, and we'll talk about obviously different formats and whatnot, but it's a no salary cap auction for real dollars. So every dollar you spend is an actual dollar. and there's no market. So last year, 5 teams spent $1,000. I did not. That's degenerate. No, God no.
Yeah, that is degenerate. 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. Yeah, so 15 years.
Yeah, there's a ton of auction experience up here. So if you guys have some questions, we're definitely going to do questions the last, 15 or 20 minutes. So how many of you have done an auction before? Yes. All right. Now that's good to see. The hands went up there. All right. How many of you done more than 10 auctions in your life? Okay. More than 20? It's pretty rare. It's pretty rare because the format is hard to find, and it's hard to find other people that want to do it with you. So if you ever want to find a league, certainly don't be afraid to reach out to one of the 4 of us. We can put you in. John will hook it up like a main line in your veins, and you'll be in 30 of them before the end of the week. All right. So let's talk a little bit about just because there is a lack of ability to find them. A lot of people don't have the experience, and really auction drafting is about getting the reps. I mean, if you don't do them, you can't get better, and it is really hard to find good mock auctions. And so really it just comes down to finding leagues and getting in them. So the experience is tough. What would you guys tell people that have less than 10 auctions under their belt that maybe people are sort of overlooking or don't think about as somebody newer to the format?
So as he was talking about getting the reps, of course it's important to get the reps. My first bit of advice would be appreciate the value of every dollar. We learned that as kids growing up, right? But appreciate the value of every dollar. I think I've yet to be in an auction, God knows how many it's been, where I didn't think at some point how nice it would be to have a max bid of $5 instead of $4. You know what I'm saying? Or $1, yeah. Or as Drew did yesterday, he had $28 when everybody else had less than 10. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
I finished it, man.
If you don't appreciate the value of the dollar, it'll come back to bite you at some point. Just inevitably, it will. Also, and this is easier said than done, take your bumps during an auction and move on. Auctions are a roller coaster of emotions as far as I'm concerned. The highs of getting one of your guys $5 cheaper than you would expect can be balanced out with the exasperation of having one of your other targets go for, 15, and you had them valued at 25, but you can't do it because you already have 3 running backs and you spent $70 at the position or $80, $90 at the position, or like I just talked about appreciating the value of a dollar, you're just too low on money to bid up on anybody.
Yeah, and one of the things also, like going in, and this goes for everything. Obviously, if you know the format, your salary cap that you have, you can extrapolate that and know that if everybody has $100 and there's 12 players, you have $1,200 total dollars that can be spent, not $1 more. So at that point, then I usually take that total amount and break it down over the specific structure, quarterback, running back, et cetera, how it's set up. You can also go to the Auction Brief Patreon, pay $3 a month, and follow any of his draft breakdowns, and only 20%. But yeah, and actually I read a lot of recaps. I read everybody here whenever they talk about an auction they took part in, and I read, and I gain something, a small piece of the puzzle. If it's competitive edge, gamesmanship, what not to do, right here. Or it's valuable, and everyone, lends to a more comfort level, because when you're on the clock for that first time, that first bid in your first auction, it's scary to spend money because you don't know how much you actually will have, and it's terrifying at times.
I would say being flexible is like the number one thing I say going into an auction. Be flexible with everything that you're doing, because the beauty of an auction is you don't know what the variables are going to come out to be, like, at all. You can try to predict a range of things, but you have to adjust constantly throughout an entire auction, because every dollar that is bid, the market for what is remaining changes. So it's not something, 10 minutes into the auction is very different than the first player. An hour into the auction, the market is very, very different. So even if you go in with everybody with the same budget, continually adjust and be flexible, paying attention. Yes, it's important to get the players for the right price. It's really, really important to pay attention to what your opponents are doing. I'm the big players don't matter, like not just running backs. Nobody matters. What matters is what you invest to get that player. So really starting to think of auctions. That's why I think that way. It really drives that point home of, yes, it's great to get Justin Jefferson, but if you just spent so much on Justin Jefferson that you can't afford to get other stuff while you have him, your investment was too high. So in paying attention to what other people can invest is a huge advantage, because then you know when you have the hammer. Don't save $28 till the end of an auction either.
Well, this is a great point, and I want to talk about that because one of the things that happens in the Kings Classic every year, it's a 14-team league, and very skilled drafters, guys who have done auctions for a long time, and so it's what ends up happening is you realize there's not enough money in the room because they're very tight at the beginning because they know this guy shouldn't go for more than this, and so they're very disciplined about not bidding too much. So what we end up having to do is we start 10 positional players. So we start 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and 3 flex on top of the QB tight end. No kicker, no D. So we're starting 140 position players every week, where most leagues are starting somewhere around 90. So what ends up happening is in the middle of the draft, everyone goes, oh no, there's not enough players and there's too much money. So what ended up happening to me was when that boom happened, and I talked about this last night with a couple people who asked me, when the boom happened in the middle of the draft, I got one guy before the boom hit, and I didn't get a second before the boom hit, and I knew I had made a mistake as soon as it exploded. I had missed the shift in the draft. And so when John's talking about with the flexibility, it's so huge because you don't know when that's coming. And when it hit, I was like, oh no, now I'm done. And I had all this money left. However, the great part about it was after the boom was over, I was able to rake in like 7 or 8 guys that I'm very happy about as far as this league goes because it's so difficult to have a deeper team. So I felt like I finished all right, but he's absolutely right. You don't want to be the one with the most money when it's $2 and $3 player time because there's not going to be enough talent out there. But anyway, if I stop taking shots from John, let's move on here. Yeah. No, that's all right.
I'll just piggyback on what the guy said. You hear about certain kinds of builds and stake drafts, right? I came into yesterday thinking I was going receiver heavy, and I don't like the whole term builds, but that's another story for another time. I was thinking receiver heavy. I was thinking, well, if I spent half of my budget on receivers, I wasn't going to panic about that. In fact, I was going to be happy about it because the bigger the leagues, the less injury risk you want, and there's a lot less injury risk with receivers than there are with running backs, right? So, but we're talking about being flexible, and when the draft starts, and I don't want to name names, but somebody who's putting on this event spends $40+ on 3 stud receivers, the rules change a little bit. So, well, I managed to keep Bob out of this, didn't I?
Oh, you just said it. All right, I'm going to start down here on the next question because you mentioned the word builds. I do like to talk about this because I like to see what other people think, because I always feel like I'm in my own echo chamber running my mouth about it, running my FWM about it. I know one guy back there who listens. So I'm always talking about it, but then I kind of feel like I'm my own echo chamber. I like to hear these guys who do it a lot and how they approach it. Now, I can already tell you, John just hates running. Like, if John could draft -4 running backs, he would. Now, Yeah. And I sort of feel that way in most of mine. I'm going to go real cheap at running back for the most part. But there is certain formats, like yesterday at Kings Classic, where it does benefit you to see all the value coming in at running back because it is so wide receiver crazy. So let me ask you guys, when you prepare, do you have a certain type of build that you like or that you lean towards, like I hate running backs or however it goes, and how does that change with the format for you?
So, yes, I can confirm that I hate running backs, but I dislike all players. I will take running backs if they're the right value. That's what I'm saying about being flexible. It's just a matter of this is the right price to pay for the points I want to get. That's going to be the player that scores them. Great. That's less relevant to me. It's what I spend for the points that I'm going to get. So that's just how I play. But typically, like in Superflex, I will obviously spend at the quarterback when I can play more than one quarterback. They're safe. They score a lot of points. Wide receiver is where I invest. And then over the last few years, I have transitioned from spending on a bunch of crummy tight ends and basically streaming them in Dynasty to find just what does Kelsey cost me? It's just going to be easier. It's going to make my life easier throughout the year. So I will pay a premium for tight end, and running back is what suffers. that you can't spend at every position. So running back's the easiest one for me to find a cheap replacement for. And I'm more dynasty focused. You can always find old dynasty running backs that are getting cast off for cheap.
Yeah, I would love to say that I have a set strategy that is rock solid, and it's exactly to the 15% of my budget is quarterbacks, 15 is tight end, and the other 70% is wide receiver and running back. And as soon as that build comes in and Kelsey's $3 under my expected total, now I'm 22% into tight end, and then I have to reallocate as Drew. At some point, we'll talk about a par sheet, and I'll let him explain what that is. Then I have to move money around, and that's what's crazy. Is you said it exactly right. In a snake draft, you pretty much know outside of after round 8 when ADP doesn't matter, which doesn't matter before that, but different time, different story. You have a set group of 6 or 7. In auction, anything can happen and anything can change. You might go in and not assume that you want Justin Jefferson for $56 or whatever, if that's overspending by your budget. If he goes for less, it's amazing how quick that if you can't be water, as you're saying, be flexible, it just completely goes sideways. It's probably what makes it the most fun, honestly.
Yeah, I've never been a big believer in setting a pre-draft budget. I have expectations maybe, but having pre-draft budgets for positions is just another thing I think you have to adjust to on the fly. And why have that barrier to what you're doing? We're talking about removing 3 or 4 barriers during the course of maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So why have another barrier? So roughly in a typical 12-team league, I like to go cheap at quarterback. Geno Smith's my guy this year, which I was able to get in both drafts for some reason. Tight end position will vary early, and it'll depend on my projections. I'm high on Mark Andrews and Darren Waller this year. So in the auction yesterday, I went high on Mark Andrews. I saw Kelsey going for, I think it was $41. I thought it was pretty much a steal. Get Mark Andrews to 28. I don't mind spending up tight end if they're an elite tight end. I expect big things from Mark Andrews this year, just as an example. Kind of speaking on Kelsey, so if I have a strategy at tight end, Kelsey almost always is the first one to get thrown out there for a nomination. So you can kind of figure out your room a little bit just based on how the bidding process goes with him, and then you can vary from there. So if you're thinking if Kelsey goes for 25, then your $1 tight ends like Jawan Johnson, maybe you like Dalton Schultz, whatever. Those guys are going for $1 and $2, and then now you can spend 2 or 3% at tight end. Yep, that pretty much does it.
Yeah, what I love about this discussion is that you can tell there's 4 different styles here, and that's what makes auction great. You find what works for you, and what I've always said is the fewer auctions you have under your belt, my advice is always dial yourself in more to more specific ranges that you want to spend at each position, because I believe that helps you to have guide rails when you're doing your 4th auction you've ever done. These are really experienced guys. They want to have it more open-ended. But I think it helps beginners, and that's just my opinion. I don't believe that you should say, hey, I want to pay 41 and then I'm never going to pay more. No, you have to have your guideline and then just use it as a guideline. But I think it helps you in the heat of the moment when you haven't done a lot of them to know I'm going to spend X, Y, and Z. But again, that's what I love about auctions, because there's no one size fits all strategy. But if you ever listen to me, I'm always going to advocate for the less you've done, the more it helps you to dial in exactly what you want to spend everywhere. But all right, well, we need to keep moving here because I love these discussions, but I want to take some questions from you guys here in a few minutes. But I know that when I've talked to, like, say, John before about how he prepares for an auction, I don't think at this point there is a whole lot of that happening because he's done so many of them. So, right. But so let me ask these two, because I know that for you, you've done so many of them. But Nate, what do you do when you're looking at the league? I know we look at league settings and whatnot, but you say, okay, I'm going in a typical 12-teamer, 1 quarterback, 1 tight end. What are you doing leading up to the draft to make yourself feel more comfortable when you get in there?
I've kind of always taken a backwards approach too, and I like to know that I have a target somewhere deeper in the ADP, or in this case, dollar-wise, that I'm going to fill in, that I would like to have as my 3, maybe as my second running back, or John, probably your first running back if he's in my 3rd. But I do like those guys, and I try to have a set sheet and a set list of some guys that maybe I can try to sneak in throughout the draft for cheap and feel comfortable. So then if I do have a variable strategy, at least I'm good with a couple of those guys. But then again, I think that I follow along with John, is that I do enough, like, degenerate-wise. Like, I'll stay up late and probably way too late, doing too many of them, and it's just repetition until that draft that you get in and then you get punched in the face, like Mike Tyson says, and it's completely a wash. So, yeah, go ahead.
I will say that, well, you did touch on one thing. The little bit of that I do kind of prepare is I want to identify my $1 guys, actually. And anybody that's probably auctioned with me sees that I throw out the $1 guys right away, because I want to know if I get them or not. Like, other people do throw out the expensive people. They want to spend other people's money. I would rather fill my 3 or 4 roster spots that I want to spend $1 on. Then I know I have them. And a lot of times if you throw a really low player out, people are like, I'm not spending $2 on that guy. But so I do try to identify my $1 targets, and that's the little bit of prep that I do on my list. They'll have like a little star or a highlight and like $1 target. Nobody that's in my leagues remember that.
And if I may, real quick, that also is key in twofold, because you eliminate your opponent's money, but you also fill one of their roster spots. They can't take that player away when they find value later. They're stuck. So you're getting rid of those guys. I think it's worked effectively.
For the sake of this discussion and the time we have here, I'll just say what I do. My redraft and auction preparation kind of run together to a large degree. The specific thing I think I do for auctions, I think it's important to identify my guys and do that at each tier. We have tiers for snake, right? So we also have to have tiers for auctions. There are a handful of guys which I highlight pre-draft that I will be willing to go $1 or $2 more, and the discipline becomes more important. The more owners, the more managers there are in that league, the more important the discipline becomes. But so that's I think it's especially important to highlight my guys for the bigger the leagues that you get into. So, but yeah, unfortunately, I say this, like last year, Allen Robinson was one of my guys. That was noops. But there was also plenty of other my guys that hit, and you're going to hit more often than you're going to miss, but you're going to remember the misses.
Yes, I was also an Allen Robinson fan. It is a pretty big club. We all missed on that one, but that's what I love. I got no excuses. I can whine and complain about a snake because my guy didn't fall to me. But in an auction, I got no excuses. It's on me. If the guys I drafted don't perform, hey, that's who I went after. But that's what I love. I love that part of it. Let me talk about. We're at 1:30. I think we can hit it. All right. So one of the big things I always talk about is that you have to adjust for league size. I'm in some 10-team auctions. Some of my home leagues are 10-team auctions. You definitely have to differentiate in smaller leagues. You want to have the top guys as much as possible, You want to spend less on your bench. The wire is going to be richer. So I'll let these guys take it from here. But how do you look at different size leagues, 10, 12, 14, 16, the formats in the leagues? How does that change your approach inside when you get into the auction?
I touched on this earlier. The bigger the league, the less I rely on running backs, pure and simple. In a 14-teamer, and we've talked about this already. In a 14-teamer with 3 flexes like Kings Classic yesterday, I'm happy to get one running back I trust and go crazy at receiver for a while after that. The value of a Mark Andrews or a Darren Waller in this format is immense if you believe they're far and away their team's best receiver or their team's best option, I should say. Tight ends rarely bring the kind of bid they rarely bring the kind of bid receivers do in an auction. And if you think about it, how many years were you getting Travis Kelce for in mid-20s, and he's producing like a wide receiver 1, and you're paying 40+ for a receiver? Be fluid in your approach. Be fluid in, if your tight end 1 is your receiver 1, then think about it like your tight end needs to produce like your wide receiver 4 or your flex. If you think about it that way, it's been so ingrained in us that we got to have wide receiver 1 be wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 be, and it doesn't have to be like that. And if you can find the value in, and Kelsey's not going for $25 anymore, but for example, I think Mark Andrews is going to have 90 catches, about 1,100, 1,200 yards. That's wide receiver 1 production. So now if I can stack up a bunch of wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s, I'm ahead of the group. Not only do I have the advantage of tight end, and now I have a bunch of 2s and 3s outperforming a lot of other people's 3s and 4s. That's where the advantage comes.
Yeah, I found that the bigger the league, the less likely I am to have those first-tier guys. I build more second and third tier, deeper bench, because somebody's going to spend too much early, and they're going to have a weaker roster that I don't want to say easy wins, but you'll have those. And the smaller the league, obviously 10-team leagues, I'll probably sample more of the tier 1 players because I know my bench can be filled with the guys that John and I are targeting from the very get-go, and I'm comfortable with that.
For me, it's not just the size of the league. It's actually there's a multiplication factor of the starting lineup. Like, that's huge. Like Drew talked about, it's 140 players that are starting. So you could do that in a 10-team league. You could do it in a 14-team league. Literally, both those leagues could have the same number of starting players in their lineup. So, like, you have to think about both levels. You have to think about the total starting lineup. For me, it comes down to positional value. So how can I replace it? What's it going to cost me to replace a player? If it's super flex in a 14-team league, it's hard to replace. That's going to be a lot of expensive. So I can't give like a really set hard, this is where I do it. But my process is I find out how many starters there are total, how many flex spots, things like that allow me to do wide receivers instead of running backs, which is way better. Things like that. I look at those settings and I try and figure that out. And then I try and identify where is the position that I can really cheap out on. It's always running back. It just is. That's why I hate him. So, that's how I do it. It's not just based on the size of the league. It's based on the size of the league times the number of players that are going to be in my starting lineup. My bench, they're dollar players.
Yeah, one of the things that I do in the Kings Classic, because there's so many starting spots that I don't do anywhere else, is I draft a couple more tight ends because they're flex worthy. And if like yesterday, I got Cole Kmet as a backup, which I'm not a Cole Kmet fan, but he was cheap. And I said, hey, I'm probably going to be flexing him at some point because there are so many starting spots and there just isn't enough money in the room. It changes drastically with the number of starting spots. Absolutely. All right. So let's get to one more thing that I think is, maybe we're pulling back a little bit. We've been in the weeds a little bit. Let's pull back big picture for a second. Because like I said, when I asked how many auctions have you all done here, there weren't very many of you that have done more than 10 in your life. So what are some common things that you want to think about, common mistakes that you see people making that I know there's a lot of advice out there that I just don't think is that great sometimes about auctions. Not going to name any specifics, but there tends to be some common ideas that run through all auction articles that I see, and sometimes it makes me cringe a little bit. So anything that you guys can think of that are some common things that you see that are just either myths or mistakes that people are making when they're starting out?
The thing I'm going to suggest, it comes with experience, unfortunately, but you can learn it early if you get into auctions early and often, which again is part of the problem. We need to make it more. It needs to become more mainstream. Anyway, auctions tend to bring out the double personality in people, right? And I'm going to say patience in auction is a key. There are definitely times to strike like a cobra, and people. Again, I'm going to refer to the King's Classic yesterday. There's people sitting behind me, and the guy said, "Man, you are an aggressive bidder." I mean, I'll sit back, I'll eat my food for two hours, and then the other hour I am striking. I'm trying to strike. But getting back, there's times to strike like a cobra, but it's also more important to understand you'll be sitting back and observing the room more often than not over a 2.5, 3 hour period.
Yeah, I'm pretty much involved in about every pick in some capacity because I don't want to show a hand, but unfortunately, when you're involved, you also have a tendency to make sure or price check, price enforce. When a player's way below where he should go, we have this idea that we want more money to be spent. I can't let this guy go for that. Make sure that you will take that person on your roster, and maybe that, like John said, there's a price for every person. That player doesn't have a name; it's just his stats and how that goes towards your total team build. But if you really are out on Javante this year because you don't trust that multiple, ligament tear, don't price enforce him to 14 or whatever is too low, too high when you get stuck with him, because it will happen. I guarantee it's probably happened to everybody up here at least one time, and we can probably remember who that person is. Brett Favre.
I will say the biggest mistake, and this is the mistake I love to see in others, is actually when they compound their mistake. They make a mistake. Everybody's going to make a mistake. Yes, I'm perfect. Everybody's going to make a mistake. What you do to recover from that mistake, you can recover from like one mistake in an auction. It's not going to hurt you if you did overspend, you tried to price enforce, you got caught. What happens though, you will see people that they actually react and go like the whole room knows that they overspent. Everybody knows it. And so then when you see that person, you just kind of push them a little bit more to help them make that mistake. Don't be the person that then piles on mistakes on yourself. You can recover from one, but once you start tilting, so stay calm. When you screw up, just stay calm, try to recover. If you don't, your season's over. I mean, you can really ruin an auction team in a matter of like 2 or 3 moves. And if you're up against people that know what they're doing and they can push you after you've made one mistake, you're done. You're knocked out. It's great. So just don't make that second mistake after you make your first one.
See a lot of commonalities between poker and an auction draft, right?
Yeah, I'll add one other thing. Something that happens quite often. If you have it doesn't matter if you have it on paper or on your spreadsheet or whatever. You can see when the last receiver or two, the last running back or two in that tier, or one of the guys that comes to mind yesterday was DK Metcalf. Fine receiver, obviously. I don't think any of us have him valued at $38. I think it's $38 he went for. Look at your sheet. Understand. Okay, if I don't get this receiver or this running back, I may be out for the last 2 or 3, and I may that's when your reevaluation process starts. Then, not, oh crap, I got Metcalf 35, 37. I need him. 41. No, don't do that. You got to be, if you look 5 or 10 minutes ahead, you can see that.
JJ talks about the horseshoe. JJ talks about drafting in the horseshoe all the time. You never want to be the first. You never want to be like the last in it. It really equates to auctions too. You don't want to be the first person to spend on that tier 1 wide receiver because everybody's excited when Jamar Chase hits the board. Who doesn't want Jamar Chase? He's awesome. The first person is going to spend a lot. Then there's a tier that, okay, this is kind of affordable. But like you said, then you see the end of that. So then it just starts here, goes down to, that's good pricing. Then it's about to go out, and everybody goes nuts. So just don't bid at the top of the horseshoe.
I'm going to pass it back to you here in just a second. We had a question about, do you enforce and how do you handle it if you get caught or yes, right. This guy, I don't know if you know this guy, but see the smile on his face. So I will say too, what I liked about what you were talking about was that going on tilt, it absolutely can happen. And like Nate said, you can make an analogy to poker. And the problem is in poker, if you lose a big pot and you're on tilt and you get dealt a pair of aces the next hand, you just got to play them. And it's hard. But in an auction, you don't have to do that. So I always tell people, you make a mistake, you know the feeling, right? You get kind of, your face gets kind of hot. And you're like, oh no, like, and you don't have to do anything. There's no player, unless it's, one of the 3 guys that you were targeting, you don't have to do anything. Just sit back, let the tilt bleed off. It will bleed off. It'll be gone. And, there's no benefit to jumping in on the next player to try to correct the mistake right away. And so just let it bleed off, let the emotion just, and you'll thank yourself 3 players later when you realize you could have just made another big mistake. Tell us a little bit about your price enforcing tactics.
So I will say I've never been caught because I don't mind getting caught. I have never like let a player go that went real cheap that I've continued to think about. So I'm okay with that. I do not like when I get caught, but I really do like to push bids up. It's not that I get caught doing it. I don't bid to a spot where I feel super uncomfortable. There are times where I'm like, okay, I will bid to my limit or a little bit above. Again, I don't really play with limits, but I know that any move I make, all it does is adjust the moves that are down the line. So that's what I say, that I'm not caught when I am price enforcing, whatever you want to call it. I'm not caught. It just changes the path of the rest of my auction. But that's because I have to adjust, and that is how I go into an auction, expecting to adjust. The only really things that I don't want to price enforce are down in that bottom. Like, just get it for cheap there. I'll spend a little more there because it's not the price enforcing when you're in that middle of the tier. That's not price enforcing because the other 2 players after it are going to be more expensive. So it's just about trying to build it up, basically.
Real quick, guys. A lot of drafters, a lot of managers. That first nomination. I'm just going to sit back and observe the room. The first 2 or 3 nominations. Sometimes the best values are right that first nomination. And again, that's why he's got to probably talk about a par sheet, maybe not, but that's why you got to have your values going into the draft, and you got to know, okay, I'm going to go $1 more or $2 more on these guys, but I seem to remember a draft from last year, Kings Classic. I don't know if it's Dalvin Cook, and maybe that's not the greatest example, but he went for probably at least $5 cheaper than he should have. That's where you're, and if you start off your draft that way, yeah, you're going to start off with less money than everybody else. But you can't look. What is it? Sometimes you got to see the forest from the trees, right? You got to see the big picture. So.
And one last thing about price enforcing, one of the things I do on my value sheet is I have a little column that says market price on the far right side. It's generally about 70 or 75% of what I think the player is worth. Now, I don't do that for the entire sheet that I have. I will do that maybe 20, 30 guys deep, a couple tiers. But really the idea behind it, the great David Dodds said it best. He said, I'm not going to let you get a player of this caliber for that cheap. So if, for instance, you're in a draft and Patrick Mahomes stops at $18, you hadn't planned on spending $19 on a quarterback, but you can't let somebody else in the league have that good of a deal on Patrick Mahomes. You just can't let it happen. And so you just have to make the bid, and that will change your auction. But so I like to have a little bit like a 75% idea where I'm not necessarily going to go crazy getting Mahomes up to 28 where he should be, but it ain't going to be 18. So, get it into the low 20s and then you can back off. But if you get stuck, okay, yep, Patrick Mahomes, like who? So I'm not going super deep with that in my tiers, maybe 3-4 tiers deep with that enforcing, but I'm absolutely doing it because I'm just not going to let anybody else get that deal. All right, well, we could do this for 2 hours, but it's 1:43. I want to know if there are any questions out there. If not, I can do a couple other things. So we got plenty. All right. Robert, how's it going, man?
So I've probably done about 15 auctions now, so I feel good about the budget side. What I still struggle with is when in how to nominate players? What are some of your strategies in nominating players?
Great question. John, you want to start?
Yeah, like I said, so I like to throw out my dollar players fast because it helps eliminate a variable for me later of who can I get for $1 if I've already spent my dollar players. There's a couple of basic strategies. Nominate the people that you like. Nominate the people you don't like. That's really it. That's all there is. The first nomination for me usually is going to be somebody I don't like that I want to spend money on. But then after it comes back to me, I have watched a round of nominations. So at that point then, based on how the players are selling, I might nominate a guy I want, because if the prices seem to be in a good spot, then I will nominate a guy I want. If not, I pretty much just continue to, I want to feed the beast if people are overspending early. So
Yeah, I found one. I think it maybe is a fun strategy too. Is I find the most polarizing player that I want no piece of. George Kittle. I love George Kittle as a player. I don't really have any interest at where he's going, so he'll be one of my first nominations. And then after I have a position, usually a onesie position, that's probably my next 2 or 3 nominations. Not every time, but sometimes, because I want people to spend money, and I want to enforce the horseshoe. I want to create that dip, and I want other people to then spend $6, $7 more for certain players than they should, because again, devalues, depresses the entire market. I have an opportunity to strike on someone else, maybe at the top or in the middle of that horseshoe.
Inevitably, you're going to lose more of the people that you nominate than you win, right? But I think I try to lower that percentage as much as possible. I'll throw out guys I want, but the odds or the very, I'd say I probably throw out 90% of the guys I don't want, and I'll nominate 10% of the guys I do. You change it just enough though, so if anybody's really watching the room, and it's probably 90-10 is probably not the percentage, but you throw out enough that they can't get a read on you. We talk about poker in this all the time. You don't want people to get a read on what you do. You don't want to have, oh, that's the guy that bids. We had a guy like that last year. He nominated his guys, and he probably won 70-80% of them. And Drew and I talked about it afterwards, how that was just, I don't think we'd seen anything like that in the other thing I do is, and this happens in industry drafts, so it's sure as hell going to happen in non-industry drafts. I like to throw out buzzy players, guys who are getting a lot of hype. So, again, I'll use the example from yesterday. I think Marvin Mims is going to be a very good receiver at some point. I don't think he's at Cortland Sutton's price yet. He drew. I think they both drew $15 bids, just for example. I talked about, not Metcalf hasn't been buzzy. Another guy, I don't want to say I buy the hype on anybody, but Elijah Moore, for example, he's been getting a lot of hype. Okay, that to me, when I see a lot of hype on a guy, those are the guys I'm throwing out early, because I figure that's how what develops our opinions, or at least a lot of people's opinions. It happens with industry people, so it's going to happen with non-industry people.
You know what? It's funny. It sounds cliche, but when you're in a home league auction, people are going to have their biases, and take advantage of them. And I will refer you to, I did a whole episode on nomination strategies on June 22nd, if you want to check that out too. You had another one here? And Timothy, what's up, bud?
I probably play in a auction draft that is unlike any other, where there is no nominating. All the names are put randomly in a bucket and are pulled out. So Christian McCaffrey could be 3 hours in before he's pulled out. How does your bidding style change when you never know what player is going to come out? Last couple years, I have found that I have filled my roster very quickly because people were hesitant to bid, waiting for the bigger names to come out. I am not totally sold that's the best strategy. So how would you handle that?
I'm going to let the experts in on this one. That is crazy. I've never heard of that, but did we talk about this last year? I feel like we might have talked about it last year. John looks ready.
I won't say that's crazy. That's actually awesome, and I wish that's how all auctions would be run. But the sites, I don't think the sites are designed for a randomizer. That would be great, though. It doesn't change my strategy at all because I don't know when Christian McCaffrey is going to be nominated, whether it's by a person, by a machine, by picking it out of a bucket. I don't know that anyways. That's not a variable I can control, so it doesn't affect my bidding the entire way through. The only thing that affects my bidding is that current player that's up there and then the budget that I have left and my need for that position, basically, or player, the points, we'll call it. So it really doesn't change mine at all because I only base what I'm doing on what I know. I don't know when they'll nominate anyway, so there's nothing I can do about it.
No, I think you touched on everything. I mean, there's not much to add to that, but except for like you guys just said, I love that idea. And any site creators out here, we have some idea. We only want 20% of the cut.
I'm with these guys. My focus would be even more. I talked about my guys earlier. My focus would be even more on my guys, just because, again, your value is going to be here on your paper, and auctions are already a way to build the team the way you want it. The way I say it in Snake, value usually falls to you or doesn't fall to you. In auctions or salary cap leagues, you go seek the value. No.
I think people might react differently to it, thinking that it adds a layer of pressure, and so it puts people on just a little bit more of an edge. So if you can just not be on the edge, it doesn't really change it. But if it changes it for your league mates, use that to your advantage. Because if it's putting them a little more on edge, their bidding is probably off because it's not standard. So it's just something that messes with people just a little bit. But I don't think it should be a factor that should really actually mess with people. So use that to your advantage. Let them worry about that and be concerned on who's going to come out.
All right. I know we had a couple more hands. We got one here and one here. We got a few minutes left, so let's try to hit them both.
This is a question kind of about pettiness. As a draft is going on, do you find yourself picking out a person and just kind of going at them?
Absolutely. I absolutely do. I talk about it in my nomination episode. I'll aim nominations at certain people who I know have weaknesses either for a player or a position, or they're my main competition because they got a lot of money left. So I'm aiming nominations at certain people. I absolutely do that. I wouldn't call it petty. I call it good strategy.
Yeah, definitely not petty. I will pick out 11 people if it's a 12-people league that I want to target. I want to target everyone. But yeah, again, we go back to poker over and over. When you spot the mark at the table, yes, you want to be the one that's responsible for them losing because in poker you get their money. In an auction strategy, you get their money gone, and their team it's like one team that's just eliminated right at the beginning. So yes, I try to sabotage as many people as possible. my league mates are like, it's not gonna work on me. It didn't work on you guys. You guys know what you're doing.
Yeah, and again, poker correlation, faces. If I see a person visibly frustrated for missing out on a couple bids, I almost inherently think the next bid that they're going to go when they are actively pursuing the person, they probably have about a 5 to 10% bump that they're going to overspend to guarantee. And I'm hesitant. I'm scared to price enforce there, but you can kind of get that extra dollar. Now, no holds barred. I attack people in shirts and jerseys of the player they want. That can bite you, though. Be careful of that one.
Yeah. I'd say professional pettiness. I wouldn't say it's pettiness at all with what I do. But if I can see it's between me and somebody else for the last quarterback that we won or something, or it's more commonly with running backs and receivers because there's more of them. If I think I know what that guy wants and there's 2 or 3, I'm going to nominate that guy. So my guy, that eliminates potentially one more competitor for when my guy gets nominated.
Okay, let's take one last question, then we got to get out of here.
Hi guys, my name is Joe Leonetti. I'm in a 14-man auction league, and we've been doing it, my partner here and I, same group of guys for 3 years now on the auction side. And we're starting to see a common theme with the players going after a big 3, and where I do a more conservative approach, so I sit back and then go on a shopping spree later. But through your guys' experience, do you think, like when I say big three, these guys are spending their wads on 3 big players in the first round and maybe an early second round at the worst? Is the big three strategy worth the
Yeah. So 1, 2, 2, 1. Yeah. Yeah, I think starting lineup, absolutely.
Yeah, if you're only starting 8, I am not against like spending a good portion of my budget on 50% of my starting lineup. Especially in this one, if you're only single quarterback, single tight end, and so there's like 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and then flexes and stuff. Okay, yeah, I would have no problem spending 75% of my budget on like 3 wide receivers and a running back. I wouldn't even have a problem. Wide receivers and like throw a running back in there. I mean, I'd spend a ton.
Did you get price enforced on the running back and accidentally get him? What happened here? See, this is why he's good at auction. He lies to every one of you about his strategy, and us included, to throw us off. And we're gonna go. I'm gonna get whoever, Antonio Gibson, for $3. He's gonna get him. That would be a great deal.
Even with 14 teams, if it's only single quarterback, single tight end, just don't spend money there at all.
Yeah,
they're $1.
Like that stars and scrubs approach kind of is one of the ways that I've gone. You can win from any strategy. I hate to say it like that because it's such a generic blanket statement, but
have they been successful? The people that have done it, have they been successful?
I think there's value to be had in a big three in like with your setup, but I also think, I mean, if you're getting a lot of tier 2 guys because so many of the let's say 10 of the 14 managers are going big three approach, then if you're getting a lot of $10, $15, $20 players, then you should probably be the top points. And
they're playing to win. They're playing to get first place, and that's it, or last place. They don't care if they get anything below first. Well, I guess if they're going for it.
yeah, I would.
It is. It's
Yeah.
a high wire act, but if it hits, you're good.
High risk reward. That obviously not a high risk or high reward with what their approach is. We kind of touched on it earlier. The bigger the league, so let's say you go with an anchor running back approach, for example, right? That running back goes down. What are your chances you're going to win? Okay, if you go Kelsey, Mahomes, and Nick Chubb, something like that. Okay, one of those 3 guys go down, your season's probably sunk there too, especially in a 14-teamer.
All right. Well, hey, like I said, we could talk about this stuff all day. There's so many variables. That's what I love about the format. I want to recognize, first of all, the man who actually listens to the show in the room. How about a T-shirt, man? You want an auction brief? All right. And yeah, no. So, do you want the hashtag FWM or do you want the other one? I don't think you want to walk around with that on you, but that's up to you. That's right. This one? All right, man. Thanks for being a listener. I've got another shirt for anybody who wants to come up here and show me they subscribe to the show. I'll give you a shirt. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it, and keep pushing that auction stuff. It's the best way to play. Thanks to John, Nate, and Doug for giving up their time, for preparing, for being here. And thank you all for being here. Thanks.